It all started on an ordinary Friday evening, just like any other. I was sitting at a small, cozy table in the back room of a restaurant I owned. The table was set for 4, and I was waiting for my closest friends. First to arrive was Jake, then came Tony, and as usual, John showed up late. John was always busy, constantly rushing somewhere. As John sat down, he casually asked, "So, is there going to be something hot to eat? Or what?" I smiled and replied, "Yeah, I ordered chicken Kiev with sides and some salads." "Oh," and I brought out a bottle of whiskey from my private stash. John laughed. "Whiskey? From your own restaurant, man? What, are you selling counterfeit booze now?" "Relax, John," I said, pouring the whiskey into heavy-bottomed glasses designed just for this kind of moment. "I'd never allow that here. This is the real deal." We raised our glasses, and I said, "To us, my friends. We've been through everything together. Our friendship, like a soul, is inseparable, eternal, unbreakable, free, and carefree." "Dude," Jake laughed, "why are you quoting poetry? Just drink." We all knocked back our whiskey and grabbed some sandwiches to snack on while we waited for the main course. The food came out quickly, and John looked at me with a raised eyebrow. Mike, is this a late breakfast or an early lunch? How would you like to think of it?" I asked, laughing. "I'm more interested in why we're here," Tony chimed in, looking curious. "Why the big secret? We've known each other for years, and you've never done something like this." He was right. We've been best friends since grade school, always supporting each other through every challenge. We all grew up together, shared hobbies, and even met our wives around the same time. All 4 of us got married within a few years of each other, and our families grew close. But tonight was different. Tonight, I had a bomb to drop. "I know you guys are curious," I said, "but let's finish eating first. We'll need clear heads for this conversation, and 1 bottle of whiskey between us isn't going to cloud anything." Once the meal was done, I pushed my plate aside and took a deep breath. The moment had come. "All right, guys. Here it is. My wife, Lauren, she's been cheating on me." The room went dead silent. They stared at me, stunned. "With who?" Jake asked, finally breaking the silence. "His name is Tom," I said, "but it doesn't stop there." "Your wives? They've been covering for her. And as it turns out, they're cheating on you too." Jake, Tony, and John looked at each other, disbelief etched across their faces. "Are you sure about this?" John asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Yeah, man. I've checked and double-checked. It's all true. I even hired a private investigator. He got everything." "The evidence is here," I said, handing out the reports I had prepared for them. "Jake, your wife, Sarah, she's seeing a guy named Matt. He's younger, recently moved to town. They met while we sent them all to that spa retreat together. Remember that?" Tony slammed his fist on the table. "We even went to check up on them. How did we not see anything?" "They almost got caught," I said. "But one of our daughters, Emma, called her mom, Sarah, during our surprise visit and told her we were coming. The wives warned their guys, and they played it off. But when they got back, the affair continued." "And these guys?" Tony asked, his eyes narrowing. "They're a construction crew. They met our wives during that spa trip. I have no idea how they managed to keep it from us for so long. But I do know this. I'm done. I'm filing for divorce." Tony, Jake, and John were all leafing through the reports now, their faces darkening with every page they turned. "Mike," John finally said, "what do you want us to do?" "Look, I'm moving forward with my divorce. The apartment is mine, so Lauren is going to have to move out. Whether she goes to Tom or back to her parents, I don't care. But I know she's used to the good life, and this guy isn't going to give her that. His business is on the verge of collapse." I paused to let them process, and after a moment, Tony spoke up. "I'm with you. I'll file for divorce, too. Our house will go up for sale. We'll split the money. As much as it sucks for the kids, there's no way I'm staying with her." "Exactly what I was thinking," I said, sliding a pre-prepared divorce petition across the table to him. "Jake, what about you?" "I want to kill her," Jake growled. "But I won't. Not for her. I'll file, just like you guys." "Good call. She's not worth the jail time," I replied. "Especially not with your son." think about him. Finally, John spoke. Yeah, divorce. It's the only way. I figured you'd all say that, I said, pulling out more paperwork. I had these drawn up for each of you. Same lawyer. So it'll keep the costs down. If you want to talk to him, here's his card. I handed them all the lawyer's business card, feeling a strange sense of relief. It was like a weight had been lifted, knowing we were all in this together. One more thing, I said. Let's not tell the wives yet. They'll get the papers soon enough, along with the court summons. I've already arranged for our lawyer to submit everything by the end of the week. You trying to ruin their girls' night out? Tony asked with a smirk. I thought we'd make a surprise appearance, I said. I know where they're meeting. Some woman named Barb is hosting it at her apartment. They'll be there around 6. We all agreed. It was time to confront them. Friday came quicker than any of us expected. We had all made our own arrangements for the kids, knowing that tonight wasn't going to be pretty. I left my daughter, Lily, with a neighbor, while Jake and Tony dropped their kids off at their parents' houses. John, on the other hand, had his sister look after his kid. We were all tense but ready for what was about to go down. We met up at the agreed location, a few blocks away from Barb's apartment. We watched as our wives pulled up in a taxi, laughing and carefree, completely unaware of what was coming. Just 5 minutes before they arrived, for guys, our wives' lovers, had entered the building. The nerve of them. As we waited for the right moment, I felt my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't nervous, just angry. How could Lauren have done this to me? To our family? To us? But there was no turning back now. We watched them disappear into the building, and after waiting a few more minutes to make sure everything had settled, we made our move. I had managed to get my hands on a key to the apartment, so we didn't need to knock. We walked straight in. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. The atmosphere was thick with tension as we moved through the narrow hallway, listening. Soon enough, I heard muffled voices and laughter coming from different rooms. We split up, each of us going to a different door, knowing exactly what we would find behind them. I went to the first room. There, I found Sarah, Jake's wife, wrapped around Matt, the younger guy she'd been seeing. They were in the middle of things, half-dressed, entangled on the bed, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. That laughter stopped the second they saw me standing in the doorway. Sarah screamed, pulling a blanket up to cover herself, while Matt looked at me like a deer caught in headlights. He tried to say something, but I was quicker. Before he could even get a word out, I laid him flat with a punch that sent him sprawling across the floor. The dude never saw it coming. At the same time, I could hear chaos breaking out in the other rooms. Tony and John were dealing with the other guys, making sure each one knew exactly how badly they had screwed up. We didn't hold back. These guys needed to feel the pain they had caused us, even if it was just for a moment. Soon enough, we gathered everyone, our wives and their so-called lovers, into one room. The women were a mess, half-dressed, crying, realizing they'd been caught. The men? Pathetic. They sat there, bruised and dazed, still trying to figure out what had just happened. Then, to add to the madness, the front door flew open. In walked 4 more women, wives of these losers. Yeah, we had called them too. After all, why should we be the only ones dealing with this nightmare? When those women saw their husbands, beaten and bleeding, sitting next to our wives, they lost it, I swear. If we thought we were mad, these women were a whole other level. They did not hold back, screaming, cursing, and throwing punches at their cheating husbands. For a moment, we just stood there, watching the whole thing unfold. Our wives, still sobbing, tried to get away, but the enraged women weren't having it. It was pure chaos. Eventually, Barb, the owner of the apartment, crawled out from under the kitchen table where she'd been hiding, her face pale as a ghost. She clearly hadn't expected her little get-together to turn into a war zone. I never want to see any of you again, she shrieked, glaring at all of us. Who sold us out? Who told them where we were? One of the guys, Derek, I think, mumbled something, but Barb wasn't listening. I don't care, she screamed. You're all banned from my place. Get out and never come back. As things finally started to calm down, the women, both our wives and the ones who had just torn into their husbands, began to scatter. Some left in a hurry, trying to save what was left of their dignity. Others stayed behind, still reeling from the shock of what had just happened. I grabbed Lauren's arm before she could slink away. "You think this is over?" I asked her, my voice low but filled with fury. "It's just beginning." She stared at me, tears streaming down her face. "Mike, it's not what you think. I didn't do anything. Please, you have to believe me." I laughed bitterly. "Nothing happened? That's rich, Lauren. I walked in on you half naked with some guy. You want me to believe nothing happened?" "I swear, Mike, we were just talking." "Save it." I cut her off. "I don't want to hear it. Pack your bags. You're moving out tonight." "But where am I supposed to go?" "To your parents, to his place. I don't care. Just get out of my house. The papers are already on their way. You'll be hearing from my lawyer soon enough." Lauren stood there, sobbing, but I was done. I had given her everything: love, a home, a family, and this was how she repaid me? It was time for her to deal with the consequences. We left Barb's apartment in silence, each of us heading back to our own homes. The drive was quiet, too quiet. When I got back, I picked up Lily from the neighbor's place, tucked her into bed, and sat in the dark for a while, thinking, what was I going to tell her? How could I explain that her mom wouldn't be around anymore? It wasn't long before Lauren came home. She didn't say a word, just walked into the kitchen with her head down, starting with the usual excuse, "Mike, it's not what you think. You're really going to stand there and deny everything, even after I caught you red-handed?" I asked, my voice barely holding back the rage. "Just stop." Tears rolled down her face, but I was too far gone to care. She asked what I was going to do, and all I could say was, "I don't know. We'll talk tomorrow. Tonight, you're sleeping in the guest room." "Why can't I sleep in our bed?" she asked, almost pleading. "Because you'll be sleeping in the same bed with me again when you get tested for every STD under the sun. And I know for sure you didn't bring something back from Tom. Now go to bed." The words hung heavy in the air. She looked shocked, but I didn't care anymore. I was done. Done with the lies, the cheating, the disrespect. She shuffled out of the room, defeated. As I sat there, I thought about everything. Our life together, our daughter, the future. And in that moment, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Saturday morning hit like a train. I woke up early, my mind racing with everything that had happened the night before. I still could not believe it. Lauren, my wife of 10 years, had betrayed me, and now the marriage we had built was crumbling right in front of me. As much as I wanted to hate her, there was still a part of me that couldn't fully process what had happened. But what was done was done. I heard movement in the house and figured it was Lauren trying to move around quietly so as not to wake up Lily. I wasn't interested in talking to her yet. I needed time, space, and some kind of clarity before we could have any sort of conversation about what came next. By mid-morning, the guys and I were already texting each other. We had agreed not to tell our wives anything until they got the divorce papers from the court, but after the previous night's events, there was no way that secret was going to hold much longer. "Meet me at the cafe in an hour," I texted them. "We need to talk." It did not take long before the three of them responded with a simple yes. We all knew this wasn't over. What we had started was only going to get messier, and we had to be prepared for whatever came next. By the time I arrived at my restaurant, Jake, Tony, and John were already there, sitting at the same table from the night before. The mood was somber. None of us had slept well, and you could see the exhaustion and frustration on everyone's face. "How are you guys holding up?" I asked, sitting down with a cup of coffee. Tony was the first to speak, his voice gruff. "Man, it's like I'm living in a nightmare. Claire tried talking to me this morning. She was crying, begging for another chance, saying it wasn't what I thought. But what the hell else am I supposed to think?" Jake nodded. "Same with Sarah. She tried pulling the 'we didn't do anything' card, but we all know that's bullshit. I don't even know why she's lying at this point. There's no coming back from this." John slammed his fist on the table, rattling the cups. "I can't even talk to Melissa. I just can't. She's texting me nonstop, apologizing, but I haven't answered a single one. She knows she's out." We all sat there for a minute, just letting the silence speak for us. This was the moment where the reality of what we were doing started to sink in. Divorce. It felt like such a foreign word to us just days ago, but now it was the only option. All right, I said, breaking the silence. Here's the deal. The papers are being filed today, but we're going to be out of town when they get served. Tony raised an eyebrow. Out of town? Yeah. Our lawyer, Paul, thinks it's best if we get out of Dodge for a bit. He says staying here is a recipe for disaster, especially with the wives all banding together. If one of them snaps, we're looking at a messy court case or worse, a fight that ends with one of us in jail. Jake looked skeptical. And where exactly are we supposed to go? Italy, I said, a slight smile creeping across my face. We're taking the kids to the beach. Tony's eyes widened. Italy? You serious? Dead serious, I replied. Paul suggested it. We'll be out of the country, which will give everything time to cool down. Plus, it's summer, so we might as well turn this mess into a vacation for the kids. Jake shook his head, laughing softly. Man, this is insane. A week ago, we were all living normal lives, and now we're planning a getaway to Italy because our wives blew everything up. John leaned back in his chair, thinking. All right, Italy it is. How soon are we leaving? Tomorrow morning. I've already booked our flights, and the hotel is set up. We'll be staying in a small town called Pesaro. It's quiet, safe, perfect for the kids. We'll lay low while Paul handles everything here. Sound good? Tony nodded, looking a little more relaxed for the first time that morning. Yeah, man. I'm in. I need a break from all of this. Claire can deal with the fallout on her own. I'm done trying to make sense of it. Same, said Jake. Let's do it. We all agreed. The plan was in motion. We'd head to Italy, give the court some time to serve the papers, and come back when the dust settled. By noon, I was back home, packing for the trip. Lily was buzzing with excitement when I told her we were going to the beach. For her, it was just another fun vacation with Dad, and I was grateful she didn't know the truth of what was going on. Lauren, on the other hand, was a different story. She cornered me in the hallway, her face pale, eyes red from crying. Mike, please, she begged. Can we talk? You can't just leave like this. We need to figure this out. I looked at her, feeling nothing but a cold emptiness where there had once been love. There's nothing to talk about, Lauren. You made your choice when you decided to cheat. Now you have to live with it. Her face crumpled, but I couldn't let her tears get to me. Where are you going? She asked, her voice shaking. I'm taking Lily on a vacation. We'll be gone for a while. When are you coming back? I don't know. I'll let you know when we're back, but don't expect me to stick around to talk things out. You'll hear from my lawyer. But Mike, Save it. I cut her off again. I don't want to hear your excuses anymore. Just pack your stuff and get out of the house while I'm gone. Go to your parents or wherever you want, but you're not staying here. She stood there, speechless, and for the first time, I think she truly understood that this was real. There was no saving our marriage. It was over. Sunday morning came, and just as planned, the four of us, me, Jake, Tony, and John, met at the airport with our kids in tow. The mood was lighter, but there was still an underlying tension. We knew the real battle would begin once we got back, but for now, this was a temporary escape. The flight was long, but by the time we landed in Italy, we were all ready for a fresh start. Pesaro was everything Paul had promised, a small, quiet town on the Adriatic coast. The beaches were beautiful, the food was amazing, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could actually breathe. For the next few days, we settled into a routine. The kids played on the beach while we lounged in the sun, trying to relax and forget about the storm waiting for us back home. Every now and then, one of us would check in with Paul, but for the most part, we tried to let go. The days passed quickly, but the nights? The nights were long. I would sit out on the balcony of our hotel room, watching the waves crash against the shore, thinking about everything that had led me here. How did it come to this? How had my life fallen apart so quickly? But deep down, I knew the answer. It was because I had trusted Lauren, believed in her, believed in us. And she had thrown it all away. As the days in Italy passed, it felt like we were living in a strange limbo. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. The kids were having the time of their lives, splashing in the sea, building sandcastles, and running along the beach. They were completely unaware of the emotional chaos bubbling just beneath the surface for the rest of us. For us guys, though, the vacation was a chance to escape, but it didn't stop the reality of what was happening back home from creeping into our thoughts. Sure, we were trying to make the best of it, but in quiet moments, the gravity of what was waiting for us back in the States weighed heavily on each of us. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, we gathered on the terrace of our hotel room, drinks in hand, watching the moonlight shimmer over the waves. There was a long silence before Jake finally spoke up. "You guys ever think we might be making a mistake?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the sound of the ocean. I turned to him, surprised. "What do you mean? You're seriously having second thoughts about this?" Jake shrugged, staring down into his glass. "I don't know, man. It's just, Sarah's been texting me nonstop. She says she's sorry. She says she'll do whatever it takes to make things right. Part of me wonders if we should at least try to fix things before we tear everything apart." John snorted and took a long sip of his whiskey. "Come on, Jake. They were cheating on us. You can't come back from that. Once the trust is gone, it's gone. You really think you can look at Sarah the same way after what she did?" Jake sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I don't know, man. I keep thinking about our kids. They love her. What if we're making things worse for them?" I understood where Jake was coming from. Hell, I had thought about the same thing more times than I could count since everything went down. I loved Lily more than anything in the world, and the idea of breaking up our family because of what Lauren did made my stomach churn. But like John said, trust was something you couldn't just rebuild overnight, if ever. "Look, Jake," I said, leaning forward. "I get it. You're thinking about your kids. We all are. But staying in a broken marriage for their sake? That's not going to help them. They'll sense the tension. They'll know something's wrong. Do you really want them growing up in a house where their parents can't stand each other?" Jake didn't answer, but I could tell my words hit home. We all sat there in silence for a while longer, the sound of the waves filling the space between us. Eventually, Tony spoke up. "For what it's worth, I think we're doing the right thing. Claire broke my trust. Once that's gone, there's no way we could go back to how things were. I don't want to live like that, and I sure as hell don't want my kids growing up in that kind of environment." John nodded in agreement. "Same here. Melissa made her choice, and now she's going to have to live with the consequences." I took a long sip of my drink, letting the alcohol burn its way down my throat. Yeah, they all made their choices. Now it's our turn to make ours. We clinked our glasses together, a silent agreement that no matter what doubts we might have, we were in this together. There was no turning back now. Back in the States, things were moving quickly. Paul, our lawyer, had sent word that the papers had been officially filed, and the court dates were set. By the time we got back, our wives would have already been served, and the process would begin. We'd agreed to let Paul handle most of the legal work, but that didn't mean we could completely avoid the confrontation that was coming. It was inevitable. At some point, we'd have to face them, and it wasn't going to be pretty. For now, though, we did our best to enjoy the time we had left. We spent our days on the beach, watching the kids laugh and play in the sun. It was a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, we were creating memories that would last a lifetime, but on the other, there was an ever-present sense of dread for what awaited us when we got back. On the last night of the trip, we decided to treat ourselves to a nice dinner at a beachside restaurant. The kids were sun-kissed and happy, talking nonstop about all the fun they'd had, while we guys did our best to keep up appearances. But beneath the surface, we all knew what was coming next. When we finally returned home, the tension hit like a tidal wave. The second I walked through the door of my house, I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me. The house was quiet, too quiet. Lauren had taken my advice and moved out while we were gone. The house looked untouched, as if she had been careful not to disturb anything before she left. For a moment, I stood in the living room, trying to process the fact that my marriage was truly over. It felt surreal, like I was standing in someone else's life, watching everything fall apart from a distance. But there was no escaping the reality of it. This was my life now. Lily was already running upstairs to her room, excited to be home after the trip. I smiled at her energy, grateful that she hadn't been affected by everything that had happened. At least, Not yet. I was unpacking some of our things when I heard a knock at the door. My stomach tightened. I wasn't ready to deal with Lauren, but I knew it was only a matter of time before she showed up to talk about what came next. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Lauren standing there. It was Jake. He looked worse for wear, his eyes red and tired. He walked in without saying a word, slumping onto the couch like he had just run a marathon. "What's going on, man?" I asked, sitting down across from him. Jake ran a hand through his hair, letting out a long sigh. "Sarah's gone. She left a note saying she was taking the kids and staying with her parents for a while." I sat back, processing the news. "You think she's going to try and fight the divorce?" "I don't know," Jake said, shaking his head. "But she's pissed. She's talking about trying to get full custody of the kids, saying I'm not fit to raise them after everything that's happened." I frowned. "That's bullshit, and you know it. You've been a great dad." Jake sighed again, clearly exhausted. "Yeah, well, we'll see what the court says. I just don't know how this is all going to play out." I understood his concern. Divorce was messy enough without dragging the kids into it, and custody battles could get ugly fast. But I had faith in Paul. He had handled plenty of these kinds of cases before, and I trusted him to fight for us. "You'll get through it," I said, trying to reassure him. "We all will. It's going to be tough, but we'll come out the other side." Jake nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. None of us were prepared for what was coming next, but we didn't have a choice. The storm was coming, and all we could do was brace ourselves for impact. The next few days passed in a blur. I hadn't heard from Lauren since I got back, which was fine by me. I knew she would try to reach out eventually, but I needed time to clear my head before I could face her. In the meantime, I focused on Lily, trying to keep her life as normal as possible. She was my rock, the one thing keeping me grounded through all of this. But the peace didn't last long. It was only a matter of time before Lauren made her move. It was a Tuesday morning when the inevitable happened. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, and flipping through the mail when I heard the knock at the door. I knew right away that it wasn't good. My gut tightened, and as I made my way to the door, I braced myself for what was coming. Sure enough, when I opened it, there stood Lauren, looking worn and frazzled. Her hair was tied up in a messy bun, her eyes red from what I assumed was a mix of crying and sleepless nights. In her hand, she clutched a folder, papers, no doubt. I didn't invite her in. "We need to talk," she said, her voice shaky. I didn't move from the doorway. "About what?" "About everything. About Lily, about the house, about us." "There is no us anymore, Lauren. You made sure of that." She flinched at the coldness in my tone, but I wasn't going to soften. I had spent too many nights agonizing over what she'd done, and I was done letting her guilt me. She made her choices, and now she had to deal with the consequences. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I stepped aside reluctantly, letting her in because as much as I didn't want to see her, we had to figure this out, especially for Lily's sake. Lauren sat down at the kitchen table, and I followed. There was a moment of silence before she started. "Mike, she paused, gathering her thoughts. "I know I messed up. I know I betrayed you. But I don't want to throw everything away. We had a life together. We can fix this. For Lily, we have to try." I shook my head, feeling the anger bubbling up again. "It's too late for that, Lauren. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed our family. There's no coming back from that." She swallowed hard, her eyes welling up with tears, but I wasn't going to let those tears sway me. "Not this time. I know I hurt you," she said softly, "but it didn't mean anything. It was stupid, and I regret it more than you'll ever know." I let out a harsh laugh. "Didn't mean anything? Lauren, you were sneaking around behind my back for months. That's not something you just regret. That's something you planned and chose to do over and over again. It wasn't a mistake. It was a decision." She wiped at her eyes, looking down at the folder in her hands. "What about Lily?" she whispered. "She needs both of us. We can't just rip her life apart." "Lily will be fine," I said firmly. "I'm not going to keep her from you, but things are going to change. You'll see her on weekends or whatever the court decides, but I'm not living with you anymore." Lauren opened the folder, pulling out a stack of papers. "I've been talking to a lawyer. I don't want to fight you, Mike. I don't want to go through a messy custody battle. I just want to figure out what's best for Lily. I glanced at the papers she had laid out on the table. Custody agreements, visitation schedules, financial arrangements. It was all there. She was serious about trying to make this as smooth as possible, but it didn't change the fact that our marriage was over. I've got my own lawyer, I said, pushing the papers back toward her. We'll handle this in court. Lauren looked like she wanted to say more, but she held back, probably realizing there was no point in arguing with me right now. She packed up the papers, stood up, and looked at me one last time. I'm sorry, Mike. I really am, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't respond. She turned and walked out the door, and just like that, she was gone again. After Lauren left, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was like a door had finally closed on that chapter of my life. There was still a long road ahead with the divorce and custody arrangements, but at least now I knew where I stood. There was no more pretending, no more trying to save something that was already broken. That evening, Jake called. His voice was tense, and I could tell he had been drinking. Mike, man, Sarah's pulling the same thing. She came by today, saying she doesn't want to fight, that she wants to settle things peacefully. But I don't trust her. I think she's going to try and take the kids. I knew exactly how he felt. Sarah and Lauren were both trying to play nice now, but we had seen how quickly things could turn nasty. Look, Jake, just let your lawyer handle it. Don't engage with her too much. They'll use anything they can to paint us as the bad guys. I'm trying, but she's making it hard. I don't even know who she is anymore. We talked for a while longer, venting about everything that was going on. It helped to know that I wasn't going through this alone, that we were all facing the same battles in one way or another. The next week was a blur of meetings with Paul, working out the details of the divorce and custody agreements. I had made it clear from the start that I wanted joint custody of Lily, but Lauren was pushing for primary custody. It wasn't surprising, but it was frustrating. She kept saying she wanted what was best for Lily, but it felt more like she wanted control. Paul was confident we had a strong case. I was a good father, and there was no reason the court wouldn't grant me joint custody. Still, I couldn't help but feel nervous about the whole process. I had heard horror stories about how ugly custody battles could get, and I didn't want to drag Lily through that. A few days later, the court hearing was set. It was going to be the first time I would see Lauren face to face in a courtroom, and I wasn't looking forward to it. Paul had assured me that everything would be fine, but there was still that lingering fear of the unknown. Would Lauren try to play dirty? Would she twist things to make me look like the bad guy? The morning of the hearing, I woke up early, unable to sleep. I made breakfast for Lily and tried to keep things as normal as possible. She was starting school soon, and I didn't want her to feel the tension that was hanging in the air. "Are you coming to my soccer game this weekend, Daddy?" she asked, her big brown eyes full of excitement. I smiled, ruffling her hair. "Of course I am, sweetie. I wouldn't miss it for the world." Her smile was all the motivation I needed. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for her. The courthouse was cold and sterile, the kind of place that immediately puts you on edge. Lauren was already there when I arrived, sitting with her lawyer on the other side of the room. She looked nervous, her hands fidgeting in her lap. I didn't feel any sympathy for her, though. Not after everything that had happened. Paul went over the plan with me one last time before we were called into the courtroom. The judge was a stern-looking woman who wasted no time getting down to business. Lauren's lawyer presented her case first, arguing that Lily should live primarily with her mother because of stability and emotional attachment. I wanted to laugh. Stability? How stable was a woman who had blown up our family for some fling? When it was Paul's turn to speak, he laid out our side of the story with precision and confidence. He made it clear that I was an involved father, that I had always been there for Lily, and that joint custody was in her best interest. The hearing didn't last long, but it felt like an eternity. When the judge finally spoke, I held my breath. "We will continue this case after reviewing all of the evidence," she said, her voice firm but fair. "In the meantime, I am granting temporary joint custody. Both parents will have equal time with the child until a final decision is made." Relief washed over me. It wasn't over yet, but it was a small victory. I glanced over at Lauren, who was staring down at the table, her expression unreadable. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't the end of the battle, But at least I knew that for now, Lily would be with me just as much as she would be with Lauren. The storm was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could see a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. The temporary joint custody ruling had been a win, but I knew the fight wasn't over. Lauren wasn't going to back down easily. Every day since the court hearing had been tense. There were still moments when I would see Lily playing in the backyard, laughing without a care in the world, and I would feel a wave of guilt wash over me. But every time that guilt crept in, I reminded myself of what Lauren had done. I reminded myself that staying in a toxic marriage wasn't going to help Lily. I had to believe that. A week after the hearing, I was heading home from work when my phone rang. It was Jake. "Hey, man," I answered, trying to sound upbeat, but I could tell from the tone in his voice that he wasn't in a good place. "Mike, I need to talk to you," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "Sarah's trying to get full custody. She's saying I'm unfit to take care of the kids because of my job hours. Can you believe that?" I sighed, shaking my head. "Jake, that's just another tactic. She's trying to scare you. Don't let it get to you." "I'm trying, but it's hard, man. I just don't know what to do anymore. Every time I think we're making progress, she pulls something like this. It's like she's determined to ruin my life." I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. We had all been there, pushed to the edge by the manipulations, the lies, the constant battle for control. But I wasn't about to let Jake give up. "Listen, Paul's got your back. He'll handle this. You just focus on being there for the kids. That's what matters most right now." Jake was silent for a moment, then he let out a long breath. "You're right. I know you're right. It's just hard. You know, I never thought things would end up like this." "I know, man. None of us did. But we're in it now, and we've got to keep fighting. Don't let her win." "Thanks, Mike. I needed that." We hung up, and I spent the rest of the drive home thinking about everything Jake was going through. His situation with Sarah was brutal, but it wasn't that different from what I was facing with Lauren. They were both playing dirty, trying to paint us as the bad guys in an attempt to get what they wanted. But this wasn't just about us. This was about our kids. And I wasn't going to let Lauren manipulate the system to take Lily away from me. That night, I got a call from Paul, our lawyer. He had some updates about the case, and while I was anxious to hear what he had to say, I wasn't sure if I was ready for more bad news. "Mike, I've got good news and bad news," Paul started, his voice steady. "The good news is, I've been reviewing everything from Lauren's side, and her argument for full custody is pretty weak. She's trying to push the narrative that Lily needs to be with her for emotional stability, but the court's not going to buy that. You've been an active, involved father from the start, and there's no way they're going to grant her full custody." I felt a wave of relief, but I knew there had to be a catch. "And the bad news?" I asked, bracing myself. "The bad news is, she's planning to drag this out. I've gotten word that she's trying to gather character witnesses, people who can testify against you." "What? Who?" I asked, my anger rising. "Apparently, she's reaching out to mutual friends, maybe even some of her family. She's hoping someone will say you're unfit as a father." I could feel the heat rising in my chest. This was a whole new level of low, even for Lauren. She really thinks she can pull this off? I asked, incredulous. Paul sighed. "Look, I've seen this happen before. People get desperate, and they start pulling every dirty trick they can think of. But don't worry. We've got a solid case, and I'm confident the judge will see through her tactics. Just be prepared for things to get a lot messy, eh?" I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my anger in check. "Thanks for the heads up, Paul. I'll be ready." After we hung up, I sat there, staring at my phone, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. This wasn't just a divorce. This was a war, and Lauren was willing to drag anyone into it if it meant getting what she wanted. I couldn't believe she would stoop so low as to try and use our friends against me. But then again, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised. Lauren had always been good at playing the victim, at making people believe her version of events. But this time, I wasn't going to let her manipulate the situation. I made a decision right then and there. If she wanted to play dirty, I could play just as hard. Over the next few days, I reached out to some of our mutual friends, people I trusted, people who knew me and knew what kind of father I was. I wanted to make sure they weren't getting pulled into Lauren's web of lies. Most of them were supportive, saying they wouldn't get involved, that they knew this was between me and Lauren. But there were a few who were on the fence, unsure of what to believe. One of them, a friend named Mark, told me that Lauren had already reached out to him. She called me a couple days ago, Mark said, his voice hesitant. She sounded really upset, man. Said you were trying to take Lily away from her. I clenched my fist, trying to keep my temper in check. That's not what's happening, Mark. She's trying to make me look like the bad guy because she doesn't want to share custody. She's the one who cheated. She's the one who blew up our family. I'm just trying to make sure I get to stay in my daughter's life. Mark was quiet for a moment, then he sighed. I don't want to take sides, Mike. This is all just, it's a mess. I get that, I said, my voice softer now. I'm not asking you to take sides. I'm just asking you to remember who I am and what kind of father I am. I'm not the monster she's trying to make me out to be. After a long pause, Mark finally said, I know, man. I know. I won't get involved. You're right, this is between you two. I thanked him and hung up, feeling a little more confident that not everyone was buying into Lauren's narrative. But the fact that she was trying to turn people against me made it clear that things were going to get even uglier from here on out. The next week, I had another meeting with Paul. He had been keeping tabs on Lauren's legal strategy, and it seemed like she was going all in on the emotional manipulation angle. She was trying to argue that Lily needed her more than she needed me, that she was the primary caregiver, and that uprooting Lily from her would be too traumatic. It was all bullshit, of course. We had shared parenting responsibilities from day one. I had been just as involved in Lily's life as Lauren, if not more. But I knew that the court could be swayed by emotional arguments, and that's what Lauren was banking on. Paul wasn't worried, though. He had a plan, and he was confident that the facts were on our side. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lauren was going to try something underhanded. A few days later, my suspicions were confirmed. I got a call from one of my neighbors, Karen, who lived down the street. Mike, I don't want to alarm you, Karen said, her voice sounding concerned, but I saw Lauren over here talking to some people, and it looked like she was asking about you. I think she's trying to dig up dirt. I sighed, my frustration growing. Thanks for letting me know, Karen. I appreciate it. Of course, she said. I just wanted to give you a heads up. I know you're a great dad, and I'm sorry you're going through all of this. After we hung up, I sat there, fuming. Lauren was desperate. She was trying to find anything she could to use against me, even if it meant going behind my back to talk to neighbors. I had to be careful. One wrong move, and she could twist it into something it wasn't. That night, as I put Lily to bed, I felt a sense of determination wash over me. I wasn't going to let Lauren win this battle. I wasn't going to let her take my daughter away from me. I had been a good father, and I wasn't about to let her lies and manipulations destroy that. This wasn't just about the divorce anymore. It was about fighting for what was right. Fighting for Lily. The following week, everything seemed to ramp up to a new level of intensity. Lauren had made it clear that she wasn't going to back down, and now, she was pulling out every trick in the book to make me look like the bad guy. Paul had warned me that this could happen, but knowing it and living it were two different things. I started hearing rumors from mutual friends, stories about me that weren't just exaggerated, but flat-out lies. Lauren was telling people that I was an absentee father, that I wasn't around for Lily, and that I wasn't capable of caring for her. The worst part was that some people believed her, people I thought were my friends. I couldn't believe how quickly things were spiraling out of control. I was trying to stay focused on work and on Lily, but everywhere I turned, there was another fire to put out. Paul kept reassuring me that we had a solid case, but Lauren's dirty tactics were starting to get to me. Every day felt like a new attack. One evening, I was picking Lily up from school when one of the other parents approached me. She was a woman I didn't know very well, someone who always seemed friendly enough, but had never really spoken to me beyond the usual pleasantries. "Hey, Mike," she said, her tone hesitant. "Can I talk to you for a second?" I nodded, glancing over at Lily, who was chatting with her friends on the playground. "Sure, what's up?" The woman shifted awkwardly, like she didn't really want to say what was on her mind. "I, heard some things. From Lauren. About what's been going on with you two." My stomach dropped. Here it was, again. The lies, the manipulation. Yeah? What exactly did she tell you? She said you've been really distant lately, that you're not around for Lily much. She made it sound like you're struggling to keep it together. I felt the anger rising inside me, but I kept it in check. That's not true, I said firmly. I've been here for Lily every step of the way. Lauren's trying to paint me as the bad guy because of the divorce. It's ugly, and she's spreading lies. The woman nodded slowly, like she wasn't entirely convinced, but also didn't want to outright accuse me of anything. I figured it was something like that. Divorce is hard, especially with kids. I just thought I'd let you know what people are saying. Thanks, I muttered, forcing a smile. I appreciate it. She walked away, and I stood there for a moment, my hands clenched into fists. This was exactly what Paul had warned me about. Lauren was trying to create a narrative where I was the villain, the neglectful father, the one who couldn't handle the pressure. I could feel the noose tightening around me, and I hated it. When we got home, Lily was full of energy, excitedly telling me about her day at school. I tried to focus on her, but my mind kept drifting back to that conversation with the other parent. What if people really believed Lauren's lies? What if the court did? I couldn't lose Lily. Not to Lauren. Not like this. A few days later, I found out just how far Lauren was willing to go. I got a call from Paul, his voice sounding more urgent than usual. Mike, we've got a problem, he said, not bothering with any pleasantries. What's going on? I asked, already dreading the answer. Lauren's filed a complaint with Child Protective Services, Paul said. She's accusing you of being unfit to care for Lily. For a second, I thought I had misheard him. What? She's claiming that you're neglecting Lily, that your work schedule makes it impossible for you to be a good father, and that she's concerned for Lily's safety. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. That's insane. I've been here for Lily every day. You know that. She's just trying to get leverage in the custody case. Paul sighed. I know that, Mike, but the court has to take these kinds of complaints seriously. CPS will likely do an investigation, talk to both of you, and evaluate the situation. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Lauren was really going this far, dragging Child Protective Services into this mess just to try and win the custody battle. It was beyond dirty. It was cruel. What do? I asked, feeling a mix of rage and helplessness. First of all, don't panic, Paul said. You haven't done anything wrong, and there's no evidence to back up her claims. Just be cooperative with CPS, answer their questions honestly, and let them do their job. We'll deal with this. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm brewing inside me. Okay, what about the custody case? This will delay things, Paul admitted, but it could also work in your favor. If CPS finds that Lauren's accusations are false, it will undermine her credibility in court. It could backfire on her. I clung to that small shred of hope, but it didn't make the situation any less terrifying. The idea of having someone come into my home, questioning my ability to take care of my daughter, was horrifying. I had done everything I could to be a good father to Lily, and now I had to defend myself against baseless accusations. The CPS visit happened the following week. I spent days preparing, cleaning the house, making sure everything was perfect. I knew it was overkill, but I couldn't shake the anxiety that had been gnawing at me since Paul's call. When the social worker arrived, I was a nervous wreck. Her name was Karen, and she was surprisingly kind. But that didn't make the experience any less nerve-wracking. She spent some time talking to me about my schedule, how I managed to balance work and parenting, and how things had been since the separation. I answered every question as honestly as I could, trying to show her that I was a stable, capable father. Then she asked to speak with Lily. I had prepared Lily for this, explaining that a lady was going to come over and ask her some questions about school and home, but even still, I worried. What if Lauren had somehow gotten to her? What if she had planted doubts in Lily's mind? I sat on the edge of my seat while Karen spoke to Lily in the other room. It felt like an eternity, but finally, they came back, and Karen smiled warmly at me. Lily seems like a very happy, well-adjusted kid, she said. It's clear that she feels safe and loved here. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Thank you. We'll be following up with Lauren, of course, but from what I've seen here today, you don't have anything to worry about. When Karen left, I collapsed onto the couch, feeling like I had just run a marathon. It wasn't over yet, but I had survived the first hurdle. Now it was up to CPS to do their investigation and determine that Lauren's accusations were nothing but lies. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, court dates, and legal strategies. Paul was working overtime to keep us ahead of Lauren's latest moves, but it felt like every time we made progress, she found a new way to throw a wrench into the works. One evening, as I was going over some paperwork, I got a text from Jake. Jake, Sarah's trying to dig up dirt on me now too. Says she's got witnesses lined up for court. Me, Lauren's doing the same. CPS just came by. She's trying to use them to say I'm unfit to parent. Jake, unbelievable. This is getting out of hand. How long do you think they can keep this up? Me, as long as they think they're winning. But we've got the truth on our side. Jake, yeah, we just have to hold on. As the weeks dragged on, I felt the weight of the fight pressing down on me. Every time I thought we were close to resolving things, Lauren would find another way to drag it out. But no matter how hard she pushed, I wasn't going to let her win. I wasn't going to let her take Lily away from me. One evening, after putting Lily to bed, I sat on the porch with a beer in hand, staring out at the quiet street. The fight had taken so much out of me, but I knew I had to keep going. This wasn't just about the divorce anymore. It was about protecting my daughter's future. I wasn't sure how much longer this battle would last, but I was ready to see it through to the end. The next few weeks felt like a constant battle, but one thing was clear. Lauren's strategy of throwing everything at me was starting to backfire. Child Protective Services had closed their investigation, finding no evidence to support Lauren's claims that I was an unfit father. It was a huge relief, and Paul was right. This victory would undermine her credibility in court. I should have felt good about it, but there was no real joy in this win. All I could think about was how low Lauren had gone, how far she was willing to go to take Lily away from me. It wasn't just about us anymore. It was about the little girl caught in the middle of all this, the one who had no idea how hard her parents were fighting behind the scenes. And I wasn't the only one feeling the pressure. Jake had called me again, sounding more stressed than ever. Mike, I don't know how much longer I can do this, he confessed, his voice raw with exhaustion. Sarah's threatening to take the kids and move out of state if she doesn't get what she wants. She's saying the schools here aren't good enough and that the kids will be better off with her. I gritted my teeth, feeling his frustration. She can't just do that, Jake. You've got rights. Paul will make sure the court knows what she's trying to pull. I know, but it's hard, man. Every time I think we're making progress, she finds a new way to twist the knife. I knew exactly what he meant. Lauren had been doing the same thing to me since the beginning of this nightmare. Every time we thought we had the upper hand, she'd find some new tactic to keep the fight going. You're not alone, Jake. We'll get through this, I said, trying to reassure him. Just keep focused on the kids. Yeah, Jake muttered. I just want it to be over. We all did. The next major event came when we were scheduled for a court-mandated mediation session. It was one last attempt to reach some kind of settlement before we dragged this whole thing into a lengthy trial. The idea of sitting in a room with Lauren, trying to hash out an agreement, wasn't exactly appealing, but I was willing to try anything to avoid a long, drawn-out court battle, especially for Lily's sake. The mediation was held in a small, neutral office. No judge, just us, our lawyers, and a professional mediator who looked like she had seen 100 cases like ours. She welcomed us with a calm, practiced demeanor, but I could see the tension radiating off Lauren the moment I walked in. She wouldn't even look at me as we sat down across from each other. I didn't expect her to. By this point, we were little more than adversaries in a war. The mediator explained how the session would go, emphasizing that it was a chance for us to come to an agreement outside of court. I could tell Lauren wasn't interested in compromise. Her lawyer had a folder of papers in front of him, likely filled with all the demands she was going to throw at me. We started with the custody arrangement. Lauren's lawyer immediately pushed for primary custody, using the same arguments she'd been trying to make from the start, that Lily needed stability, that she was the primary caregiver, and that removing her from Lauren's home for extended periods would be disruptive. I wasn't having it. My client has been equally involved in his daughter's life, Paul countered, his voice steady but firm. There's no evidence to suggest that Lily's well-being would be compromised by a joint custody arrangement. In fact, the investigation by Child Protective Services confirmed that both parents are capable of providing a safe, loving environment for the child. Lauren shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but her lawyer pressed on. We believe it's in the best interest of the child to remain primarily with her mother, with regular visitation for the father. Paul didn't miss a beat. That's not joint custody. That's relegating my client to a weekend parent. He deserves more than that, and Lily deserves to have both parents in her life equally. I sat there, watching the back and forth between the lawyers, trying to keep my emotions in check. This wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about doing what was right for Lily. She needed both of us in her life, not just one. The mediator stepped in, trying to guide us toward a compromise. Perhaps we can discuss a 50-50 custody arrangement with alternating weeks or a similar schedule that would give Lily equal time with both parents. I could see Lauren stiffen at the suggestion. She didn't want that. She wanted control, but I wasn't going to back down. That sounds reasonable to me, I said, my voice steady. Lily should have both of her parents equally. Lauren's eyes finally met mine, and I saw the flash of anger in them, but I didn't care. I was done playing her games. If she thought I was going to roll over and let her take Lily away, she was wrong. The mediation dragged on for hours, with both sides digging in on various issues. Custody, financial arrangements, the house. Lauren wanted to keep everything. She wanted to stay in the house, have primary custody, and essentially control every aspect of Lily's life. But I wasn't going to let her. By the end of the session, it was clear we weren't going to reach a settlement. The mediator looked exhausted, and even our lawyers seemed ready to throw in the towel. "We'll have to take this to court," Paul said as we walked out of the building. "Lauren's not interested in compromise, and neither are we." I nodded, feeling both relieved and frustrated. At least now we knew where we stood. The gloves were off. This wasn't going to end quietly. The weeks leading up to the court date were some of the most stressful of my life. Every day felt like a new challenge. Whether it was dealing with the logistics of shared custody or trying to prepare for the legal battle that was looming over me, I was lucky to have Paul in my corner. He was relentless, gathering evidence, building our case, and preparing me for what was coming. Lily, bless her heart, was handling everything with the resilience only a kid could have. She didn't know the full extent of what was happening, but she knew things were different. She spent half her time at Lauren's house and half with me. It wasn't ideal, but for now, it was the best we could do. One night, while we were having dinner, Lily looked up at me with those big brown eyes and asked, "Daddy, why don't you and Mommy live together anymore?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been dreading this moment, the one where she would start asking questions about why her world had changed so drastically. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Sweetie, sometimes grown-ups have a hard time living together. It doesn't mean we don't love you. Mommy and I both love you very much. We're just trying to figure out the best way to take care of you." Lily frowned, clearly not satisfied with my answer. "But why can't we all live together? Like before?" I reached across the table and took her hand, my heart breaking a little. "I wish we could, Lily, but sometimes things don't work out the way we want them to. But no matter what happens, we're both here for you. Always." She nodded slowly, but I could see the confusion still lingering in her eyes. It was hard enough going through this as an adult. How could a 7-year-old possibly understand? When the court date finally arrived, I felt a strange mix of dread and relief. It had been a long road to get here, but now, everything would be laid out in front of the judge. The truth would come out, and I just had to hope that it would be enough to secure my place in Lily's life. The courtroom was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the intense emotions swirling inside me. Lauren was already there when I arrived, sitting with her lawyer, her face a mask of calm. She didn't even look at me. Paul had prepared me for what was coming, but nothing could fully prepare me for the onslaught of accusations Lauren's lawyer threw at me. He painted me as a workaholic, someone who couldn't possibly provide the stability Lily needed. He even brought up the CPS investigation, despite the fact that it had been closed with no findings against me. But Paul was ready. He dismantled every argument they made, piece by piece, reminding the court that I had been an involved father from day one. He pointed out that the CPS case had been based on false accusations and that I had been cleared of any wrongdoing. He presented evidence of my work schedule, showing that I had the flexibility to care for Lily. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and did my best to stay calm, even though my heart was pounding in my chest. I told the judge about my relationship with Lily, about how much I loved her and how I had been there for her every step of the way. I wasn't perfect, but I was a good father. And that was all that mattered. Lauren's side pushed hard, but in the end, I knew that the facts were on my side. And so did Paul. As the judge prepared to make her ruling, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. I glanced over at Lauren, wondering what she was thinking. Did she still believe she was going to win? Did she really think the judge would take Lily away from me? Finally, the judge spoke. I have reviewed all of the evidence, and I have considered the arguments from both sides, she began, her voice calm but authoritative. It is clear that both parents love their child and want what is best for her. However, it is also clear that the child deserves to have both parents equally involved in her life. I held my breath, waiting for the final decision. I am granting joint custody, with a 50-50 split of time between both parents. This arrangement will allow the child to maintain strong relationships with both her mother and her father, while providing stability and consistency. I exhaled, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't the end of the battle, but it was a victory. I had fought for Lily, and I had won. As the judge continued outlining the details of the custody arrangement, I glanced over at Lauren. She looked stunned, as if she hadn't expected this outcome. But there was no gloating in me, no satisfaction in seeing her defeated. All I felt was relief. Relief that Lily would still have me in her life. When the hearing ended, I walked out of the courtroom, feeling lighter than I had in months. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, but for now, I had won the most important battle. Lily would stay with me, and that was all that mattered. As I left the courtroom, a mix of emotions washed over me: relief, exhaustion, and an odd sense of emptiness. I had fought so hard for this moment, for Lily's future, and now that it was over, I wasn't sure what to feel. The courtroom battle had been draining, but at least it was done. I had won joint custody, and Lily would remain a central part of my life. That was all that really mattered. I stepped out into the bright daylight, taking a deep breath. Paul walked beside me, looking as satisfied as a lawyer could after a hard-fought case. "Mike," he said, clapping me on the shoulder, "you did great. The judge saw through all of Lauren's nonsense, and now you've got a solid custody arrangement in place." I nodded, feeling the weight of it all. "Thanks, Paul. I couldn't have done this without you." He smiled. "Just doing my job. But remember, it's not about winning or losing. It's about making sure Lily has the best life she can, with both parents involved." I knew he was right, but it still felt like a win. After everything Lauren had put me through, trying to take Lily, dragging CPS into it, smearing my name with lies, this victory meant something. It meant that the truth had prevailed, that I hadn't been the monster she tried to paint me as. As I drove home, my mind kept circling back to the future. What would life look like now? How would Lily adjust to this new reality? How would I? When I got back to the house, it felt different, lighter in a way. The constant tension that had been hanging over everything for months was finally gone. Lily was at school, so the house was quiet. I took the opportunity to sit on the back porch, cracking open a beer and letting the reality of the situation sink in. I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. The discovery of Lauren's betrayal, the intense fights, the legal battle, the ups and downs. It had been a nightmare, but it had also been a wake-up call. It forced me to confront the truth about my marriage, about the people I had trusted, and about myself. Lauren's infidelity had broken something fundamental between us, but it had also taught me that I was stronger than I thought. I had fought for Lily, and I had fought for myself, and now that the worst was behind me, I felt a sense of closure. The door to that chapter of my life was finally shutting. A few days later, I sat down with Lily to explain what the new arrangement meant for her. She had handled the separation better than I could have hoped, but I knew this was going to be a big adjustment. We were sitting at the kitchen table, her small hands playing with a crayon as she doodled on a piece of paper. "Lily," I started gently. You know how Mommy and I have been trying to figure out the best way to take care of you? She looked up at me, her eyes wide and curious. Yeah, Daddy. Well, we talked to a judge, and she decided that you're going to spend equal time with both of us. You'll be at Mommy's house for some days, and then you'll come stay with me for some days. It'll be half and half. Lily frowned a little, clearly processing what that meant. Does that mean I'll be moving a lot? Sort of, I said, but it's just so you get to see both of us. We both love you, and we want to be there for you. She nodded, but I could tell it wasn't easy for her. Will we still do fun things, like going to the park? Of course, I said with a smile. We're still going to do all the fun things we always do. That's not going to change. And you can always call me when you're at Mommy's, okay? Okay, she said softly, her little face lighting up with a smile. Can we go to the park now? I laughed, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. You bet. Let's go. The weeks that followed were an adjustment for all of us. The back-and-forth custody schedule took some getting used to, but Lily adapted quickly. Kids are resilient like that. She would come back from Lauren's house with stories of what they had done, and then we'd create our own adventures when she was with me. It wasn't ideal, but it was working. Lauren, on the other hand, kept her distance. The court case had forced us into clear boundaries, and for once, she wasn't pushing. There were no more accusations, no more underhanded tactics. I think the reality of the situation had finally sunk in for her too. We weren't going to reconcile. We weren't going to go back to the way things were. The fight was over. One afternoon, I was picking Lily up from school when I saw Lauren for the first time since the court ruling. She was waiting in her car, her sunglasses hiding her eyes, but I could see the exhaustion in her face. It was strange, seeing her like that. The woman I had once loved, the mother of my child, now just a person I shared custody with. So much had changed. As I walked Lily to the car, Lauren got out and came over. I braced myself, not sure what to expect. Mike, she said quietly, her voice calm, I just wanted to say, I'm glad we worked things out for Lily. I studied her for a moment, unsure of where this was coming from. Yeah, I replied carefully. Me too. She gave a small, tired smile. She's a good kid. I just want what's best for her. I know, I said, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like a lie. There was a brief, awkward silence before Lauren nodded and turned back to her car. It wasn't much, but it felt like a small step toward peace. Maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to be civil for Lily's sake. I wasn't holding my breath, but it was a start. As the months passed, life slowly started to settle into a new normal. I had my time with Lily, Lauren had hers, and we both made sure to put Lily's happiness first. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of tension, but for the most part, we had found a way to make it work. I threw myself into being the best dad I could be. Lily and I spent our weekends exploring parks, playing soccer, and even taking road trips. Every time I saw her smile, it reminded me that everything I had been through, the heartache, the court battles, the stress, had been worth it. I had fought for her, and I had won. One evening, as we were sitting on the couch watching a movie, Lily curled up next to me, resting her head on my shoulder. I looked down at her, my heart full of love and gratitude. Daddy, she said softly, her eyes drooping as she started to fall asleep. Yeah, sweetie? I love you. I smiled, kissing the top of her head. I love you too, Lily, more than anything. In that moment, I knew that everything was going to be okay. The storm had passed, and we had come out the other side stronger than ever. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace.